WMNF. This is True Talk, and this is your host, Ahmed, Bedier, and Samar, Jarrah. We're going to be talking with Hassan Hamami, who is an American Palestinian who survived the Nakba. The Nakba in the Arabic language is what describes what happened to the Palestinians in 1948 in what is known as the establishment of the State of Israel. The Nakba in the English language means the catastrophe, the ethnic cleansing of the Palestinians. More than 750,000 people used to live in Palestine. And we're very pleased that Hassan was in Palestine at that time. I think he was 15 years old, and he will talk to us, Ahmed, about what has happened and also about his childhood there. Very, very interesting human being. I'm lucky that I have come to know him maybe 30 years ago in Florida. So I think it's going to be a very interesting show. Very painful show, but very important for our listeners to listen to it.
This is an important time for that because last week marks the anniversary of the Nakba, 76 years since the Nakba of 1948. As Samar said, it's the catastrophe. And for Palestinians and for people in the Arab world, it's a painful memory and lots of trauma. On the other hand, Israel was celebrating what they call the same event as their independence. Independence from what? It's not clear. But many people also speculate that they time their celebrations at the same time as the Nakba, the catastrophe, to kind of overshadow the event of the catastrophe because they don't want the world to actually know about it. And it's not something that many people have heard of because you rarely hear from the Palestinian perspective. So I'm looking forward to our conversation today with our special guest, which is very rare and very unique, someone who actually is a survivor of a Nakba, who is with us and lives in Florida and will be here to tell the story. But to introduce our listeners to the issue of a Nakba, Samar, we'll also play an explainer about that. But let's go ahead and welcome our guest, Hassan Hamami, with us. Welcome, Hassan Hamami.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, Samar.
Yes, thank you for joining us. So if you don't mind, before we get into your specific story, and I actually learned about you because I saw you featured in a story of Middle East Eye that Samar brought to my attention. But since a lot of people don't actually know what the Nakba is from our listeners, we want to just play a short explainer that explains what happened in those events, and then we'll get your reaction, also the conversation with you right after that, if you don't mind. So please pay attention to this presentation.
Actually, this was
yes?
71 years ago.
76 years. Well, this is on the screen right now. Is actually this explainer is a little outdated, but still very relevant. But I liked how it provides all the information in 6 minutes. This actually aired on Al Jazeera some time back. So the screen does say 70 years ago, but it's actually now 76 years ago. But the events of the Nakba continue and haven't changed. Here it is.
The catastrophe in Arabic took place in Palestine in 1948, in which more than 750,000 Palestinians were forcefully displaced from their homes and pushed into refugee camps in East Jerusalem, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and neighboring countries. But the Nakba didn't end in 1948. The catastrophe continues to affect more than 12 million Palestinians, who remain stateless today. Historical Palestine was mostly made up of Palestinian Muslims, Christians, and a small number of Jews, who generally lived together peacefully. The persecution of Jews across Europe led them to believe that they were not safe there. And Zionists saw Palestine as a prime location for a Jewish homeland.
And it was clear that there were Palestinians on the land. Zionist leaders and common people alike got used to the idea that the only way of making Palestine a Jewish state is by causing the Palestinians to leave.
The Jewish Zionist movement began organizing immigration and buying land in Palestine. This was the first step in turning Palestine into a Jewish homeland. Then World War I began. Britain promised Zionist support for a Jewish national home in Palestine. This came as a formal political letter known today as the Balfour Declaration. It also included that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. When World War I ended and the Ottoman Empire was defeated, Britain occupied Palestine.
Britain provided the muscle under which they could simply emigrate. I mean, they couldn't have immigrated were it not for the British presence. Because the crucial battle in the early stages was simply getting Jews into Palestine and acquiring land. They couldn't have done that without British government's sponsorship.
Jewish migration into Palestine continued for decades, and the Palestinian people organized large demonstrations against this influx. Palestinians saw British support of Zionism as biased and unfair. So the people of Palestine revolted in 1936 to fight against British and Zionist occupation. During the 3-year uprising, thousands of Palestinians were killed, and hundreds of British citizens and Jewish Zionists died as well. Britain dismantled the Palestinian Revolution, leaving them with no political or military leadership. However, the British also began limiting Jewish migration. This upset the Jews who had fought with the British during the uprising and led them to create their own forces. Zionist militias carried out bombing attacks against both the British and the Palestinians. As things got out of hand, the British announced in 1947 that they'd be ending their mandate on Palestine. The file on Palestine was then transferred to the UN, which suggested dividing Palestine into an Arab and Jewish state. As the British were preparing to leave, the new Jewish population began taking over, and it helped that they were heavily armed. The ethnic cleansing of Palestinians began months before the British officially left Palestine. Zionists were taking over major cities and hundreds of villages, forcing thousands of Palestinians into neighboring countries.
It happened many times that the Israeli, very holy soldiers took 10 of the youngsters in the middle of the village, shot them just in order to kill them, in order that all the others will see it and run away. And if it's not enough, they took others also.
The British ended their mandate on May 14, 1948, leaving their tanks and armored weapons to the newly created State of Israel. From the time the British occupied Palestine in 1917 to when they left in 1948, the number of Jews is estimated to have multiplied 10 times to 500,000. As Zionist Jews declared the State of Israel on May 14, 1948, the surrounding Arab nations declared war, with the objective of liberating Palestine. Although Palestine had the support of other Arab nations and they outnumbered the Jewish population, the Israelis also had foreign military, political, and financial support.
They were a highly prepared, highly dedicated, well-armed fighting force, which was superior to all the Arab armies combined.
Israel grew beyond the UN partition lines during the Arab-Israeli War by destroying Arab villages and further reducing the Palestinian population. By April 1949, more than 500 villages and 10 cities were captured by the Israelis. Over 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homes, and over 13,000 Palestinians had been killed. Even then, the Nakba did not end. Today, Israel occupies the whole of historical Palestine. Israelis continue to build illegal settlements on occupied Palestinian territories. Palestinians in the West Bank live under military law, which subjects them to checkpoints, curfews, and arbitrary arrests. Palestinians in Gaza live under a blockade imposed by Israel. Gaza is set to become unlivable by 2020. Palestinians today continue to demand their right to return to their homes. For them, the Nakba will not end until this right is granted.
And welcome back to our show, True Talk on WMNF. And if you're joining us on WMNF 88.5 or listening to us on WMNF.org or catching this on the podcast or on Samar's Twitter account where this is being broadcast there, we are commemorating a Nakba, which is the catastrophe where so many Palestinians, 750,000 Palestinians were expelled in 1948 when Israel declared its state. Of course, there were a lot of atrocities that happened before then, as we heard in this explainer that was done by Al Jazeera. It was a bit annoying because there was some background music on it that Samar didn't like, but I think you got the message. And now joining us is Hassan Hamami. He's a Palestinian American who is a survivor of a Nakba and a catastrophe. Hassan, you just saw this short explainer that explained a brief history in just 4 minutes. Of course, it doesn't do it justice, but is that your version of events as well? Does that add up to what you believe happened, or what you know, or what you were told, or what you witnessed?
The period was started over 100 years ago, and the events that started existential.
Sorry, there's some sort of feedback happening. Do you hear that, Samar?
Yeah, maybe Hassan, you have two mics working at the same time?
Shut my iPhone.
Okay. Sometimes this is the challenges that we have, Samar, when we're doing remote conversations. Of course, we are able to bring you these great guests because of the technology. Sometimes it works. Actually, it works great most of the time. Right now, we're having this conversation. We're in different places. But you thought, Samar, that this was an important conversation, a very important guest to have, because
he's a living witness, flesh and blood and heart and feelings. And I have seen Hassan, give talks throughout the years in Florida. But really, when he talks about his childhood in Palestine, and I think to the Friends school he went to, I'm sure Hassan will be talking about it. But Hassan, you were attempting to answer Ahmed. He was asking you if this 4 minutes primer by Al Jazeera is accurate. And of course, you can just start whatever you want, because I think you were aware. I mean, you were maybe 10 years old or 15 years old. I'm not sure how old you were. So it's not like it's something that you have read about. This is something that you have lived. So you can start wherever you want, Hassan.
I witnessed it, and I survived it. I was 15 years old in the middle of the Nakba. At age 15, you know what's happening around you. Actually, at that time, those 2 years at the end of World War II, Palestine was at its finest. Life was good. There were plenty of jobs for people. The citrus industry, or citrus business, growing and exporting, was a major part of the economy of Palestine, and it was part of what my father did. And I went to a school, a Christian Brothers school, which was an all-boys school. And the boys at the school were Christian Palestinian boys, Jewish Palestinian boys, and Muslim Palestinian boys. Did you get that? They were all Palestinian. We didn't, think of each other as Christians and Muslims and Jews. We were quite citizens of the same place. We had lived an integrated life, but there was this huge kind of influx of immigrants that were being poured out of Europe into Palestine in a way that was totally out of control. It was out of control because, in fact, the old Jewish Palestinian society spoke Arabic. They went to synagogue and they actually prayed in Arabic. They didn't pray in Hebrew. the Jewish population of Israel, or what was in Palestine, Israel today, really all had to learn Hebrew from scratch as part of the creation of a Jewish state. But the country itself was beautiful. It was highly developed. It was awaiting the freedom of commerce and education and so on. The educational system was fantastic. The city of Jaffa had great schools. And in fact, in the 7 months before the Nakba, when the United Nations made the resolution to divide Palestine into two countries. Now, the United Nations made the resolution to divide Palestine into two countries and to give 54% of it to a Jewish state and leave 46% for the Palestinians. At that time, the Jewish people owned no more than 6% of the land of Palestine legally. No more than 6%, most of which they had bought, and they had bought over the previous maybe 50 or 60 years with a lot of money being raised from Europe and from the United States. And when you think of the way people can become owners of a land, there are only two simple ways. Either you buy it from someone who owns it, or you're given it by someone who owns it legally. You're not given it by someone who doesn't own it. The United Nations did not own a single inch of Palestine, nor did they consult or consider the views of the Palestinians. But that was laying the seeds of the Nakba, because for previously, nearly 70 years before that, the Jews of Europe, both the elites of Western Europe and the poor Jews of Eastern Europe who lived in East Germany and in the Czech Republic and Russia and Croatia and other places, were really suffering 2,000 years of terrible Christian anti-Zionism. And but the West won the war, and they decided they could do what they choose, and they did, and they imposed it on us. Now, 7 months before we left, a group of us students from the Al-Amiriya, from the French Christian Brothers School and the Orthodox School, all boys, decided to get together and learn to be part of the resistance. And what we did at our age is learn to do first aid. And this was highly organized, headed by a guy who became later on a member of a PLO. Excuse me. Let me have a drink of water.
Break to drink water. That this is True Talk on WMNF, and Ahmed and I are talking.
Thank you so much.
Hassan Hamami, a survivor of the Nakba. You can continue with this first aid training. And I also want to ask you, Hassan, about Jaffa, the city that you were born at, because in the narrative, in the Israeli narrative, they say that they went to this barren land and they had to turn the desert into green. And so, I want you to finish your thought on what happened.
Actually, let me pick up on that, because in fact, the selling idea of the leadership of the European Jews, the people who were in government all the way from the time of the Israeli onto the bankers and other elites, was that this was going to be a land without people for a people without land. The assumption is Palestine did not have any people. That's the first lie, but essentially that's part of the selling for a people without a land, for the Jews of Europe who don't have a land. Actually, in the late 19th century, the leadership of the Zionists in Western Europe chose two educated rabbis to come to Palestine to find out what it was. And they spent 3 months in Palestine before 1890. And when they went back, the title of their report was, "The bride is beautiful, but she's already taken." So it was, they said, essentially, Palestine, this bride, was beautiful, but she was already taken. There are people in there. However, that didn't stop them. It didn't stop them because, in fact, it was a hysterical movement to try awaken a 2,000-year-old history, oral history of Jews who had spread out through the world, many of whom were really never related to the grandchildren of Abraham and Moses, but some of them were. In 1948, as I said, the citrus business was actually a very wonderful business that attracted jobs for people who came from Syria, from Egypt, from Jordan and other places to work in collecting picking the fruit, wrapping it and packing it and shipping it and so on. And my father, who had never owned much land, was an exporter. He was a self-made, he was a Renaissance man. He was a member of the Islamic club, and he was a ping pong champion in there. And the Islamic club was one of 3 clubs in the city where kind of people joined. It was a sports and social club, and they supported football teams and so on. There were school for girls. They were, at that time, Jaffa had 3 daily newspapers. 3, not 1, 3 daily newspapers. It had a radio station which was called the Near East Broadcasting Station, which broadcast news and music and social events and so on to everywhere in the Middle East, in the Near East, as far as Iraq and on the east, and as far as Tripoli, Libya in the west. And in the school, as I said, we studied in 3 languages. It was a high school. One of our teachers was actually a European Jewish immigrant who came from Czechoslovakia. He was our teacher of English literature. And when we would play up and give him a hard time a little bit, he would actually rap his desk and say, "Be careful, you are the future intelligentsia of Palestine." Now, this was an enlightened Jewish immigrant who came from Czechoslovakia. He looked at us and said, you are the future intelligentsia of Palestine. Okay, you can play when you want to, but be serious when you have to. So in January of 1948, literally 2 months after the United Nations made their resolution, 2 fully armed jeeps laden with bombs and mines were brought into the center of Jaffa, right in the center of Jaffa, and parked on a small street between the Serai, the governor's, what used to be the governor's residence on the one side, and Barclays Bank and a pharmacy on the other side. The men from one car went out to the other car, they set it off, and it blew up. And that whole Serai was blown to bits on a Saturday morning. And it had been turned into an orphanage for children. So all the children that were there essentially were buried alive. This was the single most serious act of terrorism that took place right in the center of Jaffa, right under the eye and across the street of the main police station, which was manned by the British occupation forces, who called themselves the mandate country. They gave themselves the mandate at a time when they actually sought the help of the Palestinians and the other Arabs to fight against the Ottomans and promised them to have their independence and their self-determination if they win. And at the same time, they promised the Jews of Europe, through the help of the elites in Britain, to give them a national home for Jews in Palestine. So they made these 2 conflicting promises. They were serious, really, about one, because they were very much in that situation. During the war, at least 100,000 Jewish young men and women actually enlisted with the British in the British Armed Forces. And at the end of the war, they were the core of the Haganah, which then became the Israeli Defense Force, IDF, which actually has never been a defense force. It has been an occupation force, the Israeli occupation force since then.
Hassan, I'm just curious to know, while all this was happening, the Palestinians didn't know that the British were siding with the Jewish side, and they are planning to have a home.
The Palestinians knew exactly what the British had promised and what the French and the other Europeans had intended to do, and the Americans were still in the background at that time. However, they were essentially, had been completely rendered leaderless, because 3 times after the British went into Palestine, the Palestinians rose in a revolution against the British occupation. And the largest one was in the late 1930s, when they did a general strike, which was a general strike against the British forces, against the British occupation, essentially to stop bringing in large numbers of Jewish refugees against the will of the people. And during those, the last set of strikes, every one of the Palestinian leaders was arrested by the British, and the most senior ones were sent into exile into an island south of India, into the Seychelles. The Seychelles today is a resort island. At that time, it was an island occupied by the British, and they used it as a prison where they exiled all of the leaders of the Palestinian people, all Christians and Muslims, Arab leaders, Palestinian leaders, and the ones who were less highly influential were sent to a military jail in Cyprus. So during the whole World War years, the Palestinians were essentially leaderless. At the end of the war, the Palestinians tried to organize themselves by approaching the then formative United Nations and the law courts and the British Parliament and the French Parliament, and they were essentially given the cold shoulder the whole time. The decision had been made. 19 days before we actually left Jaffa was the massacre of Deir Yassin. Deir Yassin was a small village about halfway between Jaffa, Tel Aviv on one side on the west, and Jerusalem on the east. And it had been defended by its people against the Haganah and against the Stern and the Irgun, the 3 then called terrorist groups. That's what the British government called them, labeled them. And they were defending the country, their village. But essentially, the 3 of them joined together and they attacked Deir Yassin, and they massacred almost every single one of them. That they massacred people, women, they butchered. There were reports of actual rape. The Palestinians have never mentioned rape as part of the Israeli war system, because the whole system, the assumption of rape, is something very shameful in Arab society, and so people would like not to talk about it. But there was actually massacre of women, pregnant women whose stomachs were open slit, and people who were thrown into wells and shot in the wells. And they collected about 20 young men who had essentially run out of ammunition, took all their clothes off except their underpants, stood them on the back of trucks with their hands tied over their head, and they paraded them inside Jerusalem to try and show the people of Jerusalem, the Palestinians of Jerusalem, this is what can happen to you. This was terror. This was terrorizing the whole population. That was the date at which my parents, my father and mother, thought, really, we have no chance. We have no chance to defend ourselves. The British have left us essentially defenseless, and the Israelis have these very powerful three gangs who are armed, and they're using all of the weapons that they can get from the British, plus whatever is smuggled. So my father decided to buy tickets for us to leave when there was essentially a mass exodus taking place, not just from Jaffa. Jaffa was surrounded by colonies on the north, by Tel Aviv, and by colonies all around, northeast, east, southeast, and south, by colonies including the ones who were close to our house, Bet Yam and Holon. Holon is now like a suburb of Jaffa, Tel Aviv. At that time, it was initially built as a kibbutz, supposedly agricultural kibbutz. It did not have a single blade of grass. How do I know that? Because I used to ride my bicycle and ride along there. Not a single blade of grass. They built these roughly 30 homes in the sand dunes southeast of Jaffa as part of the ring that they intended, that we couldn't see all of this stuff happening. We were still somewhat hopeful that, like history, we would be able to live together. At the same time, they had started massacres from, as I said, from December, January of 1948 on. So we bought tickets, my father bought tickets from on a ship called the SS Argentina for all of us, my father and mother, 8 brothers and sisters. And the ship had come to the port of Jeddah. It was Jaffa. It was supposed to go to Beirut, but essentially the Israeli terror gangs, the gangs, were actually shooting at it, lobbing bombs at it from Tel Aviv. And the captain of that ship decided he didn't want to risk the ship, so he moved it away. Instead, we were panicked, and we ended up going onto a roughly an 80-foot wooden cargo sailing boat with about 3,000 people. Like when you see pictures of the people who are running away in Southeast Asia to Australia and from Africa too. This was packed solid. People were like this. You couldn't actually sit down. Once you sat down, you couldn't get up. And we ran out of water within 6 hours. There was a woman who was pregnant. She was no more than maybe 4 or 5 people away sitting from me. And she started screaming in the middle of the night. Other women came and surrounded her, and they helped her, and she lost her baby. They prayed, and in the morning, they actually buried the baby, gave him a burial at sea. This was the Nakba. This was an incident that I, as a 15-year-old boy, who was hopeful based on my childhood, that we could live together, that we had been a welcoming country, but we had been literally invaded by hundreds of thousands of Jews who came in from the West, from Europe, that Europe did not want them. They really did not want them. They were quite happy to send them to us. And they were following this myth of a land without a people for a people without a land. Now today, that myth is being played by Israel in Gaza. They want to make that a country without a people.
Obviously, there was a people there, and they quickly knew there was a people, and they tried to hide the fact that they existed. Nowadays, some politicians in America even dare to say Palestine never existed. You often hear that repeated. There's no such thing as Palestine. There's no such thing as a Palestinian. These are Arab. And then you challenge them and say, well, what about these Palestinian coins that you can now even buy on eBay? And, you can go on eBay and buy, collectible stamps that say Palestine on it, and letters that were sent from Palestine, and people's passports and ID cards. There's too much evidence. Yet,
Ahmed,
so many people are convinced. I repeat this lie. I don't know if they're just all just brainwashed or what, but the evidence says otherwise, or they're just willful ignorance. They want to pretend it never existed so they could feel better about themselves. But definitely it existed. and there were many massacres, and now they're still trying to erase Palestine, and they continue to do that as the world is watching.
Ahmed, I am a map collector.
Okay.
I've got maps which are over 1,000 years old. And one year, about 6 years ago, in the city of, in Italy, in the city of, in a museum where Christopher Columbus left Italy for America. Remind me.
Yeah, I'm not the expert on that museum, but I'll look it up.
There was the first map that was made on a circular globe in the 16th century by a map maker who was Dutch and who wanted to prove that, to get his thought accepted against the will of the Vatican, who at that time believed that the earth was flat, and he proved that the earth was round, and he prepared this globe, and the globe showed Palestine on it in the middle of that globe. And the reason he chose that globe was because he wanted to convince people through the idea of Jerusalem, Palestine, Holy Land, and it is round. And that globe is still there. I'll be happy to send you a photo of it. I've got a photo of it in my collection of photos. Also at the same time.
Is it a metal and gold looking map?
It's actually a globe.
Yeah, but I mean a globe, but made out of what? Metal?
It's made of, I imagine, paper mache, and then done according to the new map making system that is now still used to show the circular round globe.
Right, and when was that map or globe
It was in 1521.
So 1521, Palestine
yes.
is on that map, and these people are coming now and they're saying, "Oh, there's no such thing as Palestine; it never existed."
But you see, this is the thing. But you see, the thing about it is, they've been attacking Palestinians on the basis of trying to teach them things which are wrong. They've got 3 generations of Israelis who have been brainwashed of thinking that there are no such thing as Palestinians. The whole history of the kingdom of David and the kingdom of Solomon ranges to a total of 280 years. 280 years in a country which has been around at least 5,000 years before Christ and 2,000 after Christ. The fact is, we have always lived together as cousins, but not accepted the invader to come in and throw us out and claim that we don't exist. The fact of saying there is no such thing as Palestine is what's goes underneath this whole business of genocide and ethnic cleansing. So they don't want to say there are Palestinians they're going. They're Arabs, they came, so they're leaving. It's part of the terrible Zionist education in which so many people, but unfortunately not all of them, because young people, especially young people even in Israel and young people in the United States, young Jewish Americans today are seeing through this web of fabrications that there was no Palestine.
You said this.
Ahmed, let's just introduce our guest for our listeners. We are talking to Hassan Hammami, who is a Palestinian American who was born in Palestine, and he was about 15 years old when the Nakba or catastrophe happened, and he's an eyewitness not only to what happened, but also to the vibrant life that he lived with his family and his siblings in Palestine, in Jaffa. Sorry, Ahmed,
15 years old. Like you said, you were aware of what's happening. You saw, you remember. It's not like you were a baby. 1948, I mean, that project, the British Mandate, they took over 1917 until 1948. How many Jewish people from Europe actually immigrated during that period? During the British Mandate?
I've given some lectures on this subject.
Okay.
In the late 19th century, the Jewish population of Palestine was something like 5 to 6%, and at the beginning of the 20th century, the first British Prime Minister who was planning what to do with the Ottoman Empire, a guy by the name of Campbell Bannerman, essentially organized 3 royal commissions of what to do with the Ottoman Empire. And one of those royal commissions essentially was there specifically to find out how the British Empire was going to use the recently discovered oil that had been discovered in 1903, 1904 to fuel the Royal Navy, which at that time covered the whole earth and was fueled by coal. You can't do much fueling by coal because whereas oil is easy to do. So that was one. The second Royal Commission was essentially how to decide how to make sure we can do things in such a way that we can lock up the businesses, the natural resources and business and trade for the benefit of the British Empire. And the third one is how do we plant that's what the word you use, a foreign body to plant in there so that they will serve the interests of the British Empire. And that was the particular royal commission that came up with essentially the name of the person who became the first British High Commissioner of Palestine in 1919 later on. He was a member of that commission. He was a member of the British cabinet during World War I, and he was the first person to be sent as the British High Commissioner to run Palestine, and he was a Jewish person, as described by the Brits at that time, a self-respecting, practicing Jew. This is even the nature of their anti-Semitism, how they looked at the Jews. They described him, even though he was powerful, he was a member of the cabinet, they described him in that fashion. He became, in 1919, the first governor of Palestine. And he immediately wiped out all the promises that were given to the Arabs about the mandate. The mandate was supposed to be mandate first class, as they said. In the writing, it meant within 10 years, they would be prepared to govern themselves.
Right. That was the whole idea, to try to get the Arabs to join against the Ottomans, was that, hey, you're being occupied, you need freedom, you should deserve to lead yourself. And that was the whole concept, that they wanted to say that the Ottomans were a foreign body, and that somehow, aligning with the British, that they will get freedom. But that never happened. Do you suspect that it was never their plan to give them their rights, and it was all that this was just a hoax to try to...
Britain acts like a democracy within Britain, but like an empire outside Britain, okay? It's within the democracy. There were parts of the government, parts of people who actually resisted the idea of creating a Jewish state because they thought we're going to end up with all sorts of serious problems and so on. And they came up with alternate ideas to give them a Jewish state in Central Africa and maybe in Argentina.
And this predated the Holocaust.
Totally predated the Holocaust.
This plan was already before the Holocaust.
Completely.
How did the Holocaust change things as far as, after the Holocaust and what we discovered with what the world discovered the Nazis were doing? How did that help the agenda or hurt the agenda? Did some groups try to exploit that?
Actually, the Holocaust became the tool that actually got into the head of all the Western nations to say, we have to be good. We have to fix things for these people. We took part in all this anti-Semitism for such a long time, so we have to help them. But at the same time, there was money in there. There was money because essentially the first promise that Britain made to the Jews of Europe, which was written in a letter to the head of the Zionist Association of Britain by Balfour, Lord Balfour, was actually written by Balfour and 2 other people who were Jewish bankers at the same time. But Balfour was in the government. And it was repayment for, number one, helping Britain to get America into World War I. They helped Britain to get America into World War I.
Who helped Britain get into, who helped America? Britain to get America.
The Jews of Europe, the Jews of
And
Britain.
what was the evidence of that, and why would they do that?
Why did that? Because they wanted their will. They knew that they had a problem with Germany. Okay, number one, they had a problem with getting the whole of World War I accepted, winning. Without America and Canada, it would not have gone the way it would have. Secondly, there was a Jewish chemist in England at that time, and Jewish chemist who actually invented a process to produce poison gas, which was used by the British against the poison gas that Germany were using in the battlefields of northern France. So they felt indebted, and that started the whole movement of bringing Britain in, bringing the United States in. Now, this first governor of Palestine, first High Commissioner of Palestine, one of the first things he did is essentially write a whole new currency of Palestine, whole new law with languages being Arabic, English, and Hebrew. Hebrew was not an official language of Palestine. And he actually started working with Jewish organizations and made some donations of land directly by gifting donations of land in Palestine for some of the early colonies that the Jewish immigrants were coming. And this was in the 20s, okay? Now, when World War II came and the horrors of the Holocaust happened, the whole of the Western world felt guilty. I mean, they had to atone. And they atoned for their guilt by giving them Palestine, which they didn't own, which they didn't get the permission or the agreement of the Palestinian people, and which they essentially broke their own promises by allying themselves with the Palestinians in the past. The history of a land without people for a people without land is a two-edged sword. The one edge is, make people who were hungry for a home, thirsty for a place in the Mediterranean away from ugly shtetls in Eastern Poland and Russia and other places to go to. They don't have to feel guilty that they're going to replace anybody else. So that is playing on the innocence or the ignorance of the people. But secondly, to make it happen, they needed to get rid of the Palestinian people because it was a small country. The reality is, in the whole history of Palestine had been a welcoming country. There were pilgrims who came from England, France, from Germany, from Italy, and so on, to do the pilgrimage as Christian immigrants who came to the Holy Land. There were Muslim immigrants who came all the way from India and Pakistan and Afghanistan, and they lived there. There were Jewish immigrants who came from Morocco and other places who had been saved by the Muslims after the Spanish Inquisition. And the ones who liked it stayed, and they stayed in peace, and they settled. So the population of Palestine has been always welcoming for people who came in peace, who came as pilgrims who wanted to join society and so on. But when the hundreds of thousands of Jewish immigrants came with the movement of Zionism behind them, with the movement planning essentially to create a Jewish state, in a place where there was no people. So it's easy to keep selling, there was no Palestine. So now they say, make the switch, it's Arabs because they came and left. The reality is Palestinians have been there since Canaan. They're Canaanites. they're Jebusites. There are families in Palestine who are named Jebusi, who are descendants of the Jebusites from 3,000 years BC. So we've been there a long time. We were there when Abraham came from Ur and landed, and that was before there was a Jewish religion, because Judaism came with his grandson Judah, But the people who listened to him, that followed him, and they converted to Judaism. And when Jesus came, and they liked his message, some converted to Christianity. And when Islam came, the ones who listened to it converted to Islam. And this is how it was for hundreds of years, until this whole business of creating an exclusively Jewish state. An exclusively Jewish state where there were already people there, already people for thousands of years.
Hassan, we're running out of time. We have something like 4 minutes left, and I want to ask you if you are a little bit more hopeful these days because of the uprising that is happening in the American colleges and elsewhere in the world. The young people, what they call them as Generation Z, they know about Nakba. They don't get their news from mainstream media. They get it from hopefully WMNF and from Twitter and all these social media platforms. Are you hopeful that maybe one day?
I'm completely hopeful. I think the young people at the universities who are standing up and actually saying free Palestine, actually saying from the river to the sea, know what they're doing, and they are the conscience of this country. The political elites are not the conscience of the country. The political elites
but let me ask you, what does, because this is a very controversial thing when people say from the river to the sea, what do Palestinians mean by that?
Well, it's Palestine. It's been in my life, not in ancient history. A country which was from the river to the sea, that was open and welcoming to all people living in peace together, as equals together, where there is no preference for either religion or race or color or ethnicity or anything else.
And those people would include Jewish people.
Absolutely.
So what you're saying, because this is one, I'm sorry to cut you off, because this is one thing that we always get attacked for, but because they try to say, and this is what they're saying in Congress, that this chant is somehow anti-Semitic, genocidal, a call to genocide, to kill all the Jews by simply saying from the river to the sea, when in reality what you're saying is from the river to the sea means Jews, Muslims, Palestinians, people of faith, people of no faith, all coexisting and having equal rights. Is that your definition?
Completely equal.
Just as in the United States, we have equal rights under the law, regardless of our color or creed or religion or gender. We are all equal under the law. That is not what's happening.
Absolutely. You see,
right now,
that is a society I grew up in 1945, 46, 47. In my class, as I said, some of my friends, the mother was Jewish and the father was Muslim.
Right. I mean, how else did those people immigrate from Europe to Palestine if they did not have equal rights? How did they buy those properties if they did not have equal rights? But at some point, from what I'm reading from history and learning from you, their project to buy the land wasn't happening fast enough. For the period of 30 years, all they were able to purchase something like 5 to 6% of the land. And that was not enough. It wasn't happening fast enough. And then they ended up using violence and terrorism and ethnic cleansing methods. And then they turned it over to the UN, which partitioned it. Anyway, we've run out of time. We'd love to have you back on because you have a wealth of knowledge, mashallah, and you are a living witness of the Nakba. It's a sad occasion, but I'm glad that you're here to tell this story and that you survived to tell it. And please continue to do so. And you live in Florida, so we'd love to have you back on the show very soon.
Thank you, Ahmed. Thank you, Samar.
Thank you, Hassan, for being with us today. This is WMNF Tampa. We're going to continue talking about this fascinating story, fascinating memories, and I'm glad that you're able to make this arrangement today.
Thank you, Ahmed. Appreciate it. Yes, he has a wealth of knowledge and very articulate.
Okay, Samar.
And, very great.
WMNF Tampa, the scoop is next. Take care. Have a great weekend.